This is the Coach's Corner podcast, hosted by Cody Rourke. Sports, debates, and the unfiltered truth. Back to the Coach's Corner podcast. We are back for 2017. I do apologize for the absence. The last several months, a lot of technology stuff, a lot of upgrades have been made. And it's good to be back here on the Coach's Corner podcast, but I haven't been gone from radio too long. I've been on the Coach Les show on SB Nation Radio every single week talking Broncos and NFL news, as I am today as well. You can catch me on the Coach Les show today on SB Nation Radio at 1 o'clock to discuss the Broncos. But we're going to discuss all of that here and much more on the Coach's Corner podcast. It's great to be back here for episode 10 of season 2. We got about 3 or 4 more episodes until we take a little mid-season break, and then we divulge into season 3, which will be exciting. I'm excited to have it back. We got a lot of new upgrades. We got a multinational platform in iHeartRadio, and we got a lot of great guests in the coming months here on the show. So I'm very excited with all of that. But on today's episode, we're going to discuss the NFL playoff picture regarding the AFC and the NFC. Obviously, the Kansas City Chiefs and the New England Patriots are the number 1 and number 2 seed, New England being the number 1 seed. So the road to Super Bowl 51 will go through Foxborough. And then a lot of the other teams are going to have to travel to Kansas City as well, which is not going to be a tough place to win either. And then on the NFC side, we've got the Dallas Cowboys with the number 1 seed and the Atlanta Falcons with the number 2 seed. They have first-round byes. And then we got our wild card matchup set for this week between the Detroit Lions traveling to Seattle to take on the Seahawks and the New York Giants traveling to Green Bay to take on the Packers. Now on the AFC side, in the wild card matchup, we got the Miami Dolphins traveling to Pittsburgh in a rematch where the Dolphins upset the Steelers earlier in the season. Can they do it again? We will see. It was in Miami the last time they played, where Miami squeaked off the upset. But now they got to travel to Pittsburgh to take on Ben Roethlisberger, Antonio Brown, who are both healthy at this point in time. And it's going to be an exciting game to see. Will Ryan Tannehill play? The question is currently up in the air at the moment. And then the Oakland Raiders travel to Houston to take on the Texans in what appears to be an odd game between a battle of 2 quarterbacks that are currently, no one would have ever thought it would have been Connor Cook versus Brock Osweiler or Matt McGloin versus Tom Savage. It could be either of the two. We'll have to see. But it's certainly definitely an interesting matchup, something we weren't expecting to happen. Obviously, the Raiders expected Derek Carr to be on this playoff run, but a couple weeks ago he broke his leg against the Indianapolis Colts, and he is out for the rest of the season. They say there is a chance he can make it back if the Raiders were to make the Super Bowl, but I highly doubt it after having surgery last week on a broken leg. I just don't think the timetable is good enough for Derek Carr at this point in time to return to be competitive in a time if they were to make the Super Bowl, which is going to be a very tough test because, like I said, New England Patriots are the number 1 seed, the Chiefs are the 2 seed, and both those teams are rolling right now in the AFC. The Patriots look unstoppable, and the Kansas City Chiefs are definitely a deadly matchup. So I do anticipate a tough road for a lot of these teams, but I will give you my predictions here in a little bit. But more so, Gary Kubiak just resigned and stepped down from being the head coach of the Denver Broncos this week after coming off and performing to a 24-6 victory by the Denver Broncos over the Raiders in a Week 17 season finale. The Broncos went off in good fashion, obviously missing the playoffs, going 9-7. A disappointing season, especially after winning Super Bowl 50 last year. The expectation was to potentially compete to repeat, but that did not happen. 9-7, a lot of it falls on the offense. We're going to analyze the state of the Broncos in a little while, but now the Denver Broncos are going to need a head coach, and we're going to take a look at some candidates that I think that John Elway is going to look at when he tries to bring in a coach, and somebody who's going to bring back Wade Phillips as the defensive coordinator. Obviously, what Wade Phillips has done for the Denver Broncos defense is unmatched. It's unfathomable what he has done for this team, and if he were to go elsewhere or not be picked up, it would definitely be a big stab in the heart to Broncos fans and obviously the Broncos players as well who love Wade Phillips. So with that, we got a great lineup on the show here today on the Coach's Corner podcast. Let's get started. So the NFL concluded its Week 17 this past week, which saw a lot of playoff implications already set in stone. So a lot of it was just playing to play and win out the rest of the, the last game of the regular season for a lot of the teams, including the Denver Broncos, who knew they were already out of the playoffs because they lost to Kansas City on Christmas Day in Kansas City. So they were eliminated from the playoffs. And it was definitely a rough reality for Denver Broncos fans because Denver had a lot of high expectations last year, obviously returning. Obviously, I think the one thing that I said in the offseason last year when Peyton Manning announced his retirement, I think would haunt the Denver Broncos, that would be something that bites them in the butt, would be they now lack a leader on offense, which I think they clearly did. Obviously, you had Trevor Siemian, a first-year starter at quarterback, who is technically, you can consider him a rookie. His rookie season was last year. This was his first year ever playing quarterback as a starter, so technically he was a rookie this year as well. And Trevor Siemian did okay. You know what? There are a lot of critics out there who say Trevor Siemian is not a good quarterback, is not a quarterback for the future for the Denver Broncos, doesn't have what it takes, doesn't have the it factor. But I tend to disagree. And the reason for that is because when I look at Trevor Siemian, I see a guy who did quite a bit with not a lot. And what I mean by that is mainly aimed at the offensive line, which they had two horrible tackles in Donald Stevenson and Russell Okung, who I don't think they'll be back with the Denver Broncos because it was absolutely disappointing at how bad they performed at the tackle position. The offensive line single-handedly was one of the main reasons why Denver struggled and why Denver lost a lot of their games, because they had no consistency on offense. They could not run the ball. They could not protect the quarterback in pass coverage. It was really awful to see, and it was really frustrating to watch because it appeared like the Denver Broncos offense was a middle school offense. And when we look at the Gary Kubiak system, we look at a system that over the years in Houston with Matt Schaub, with Joe Flacco in Baltimore, they produced numbers. Quarterbacks put up big numbers, and all of a sudden quarterbacks weren't. We had Peyton Manning last year, who had one of the worst years of his career, but finished off on a strong note, winning Super Bowl 50. Even Peyton Manning struggled. And then what I realized from watching the Denver Broncos this season was, looking back, watching this offense with Trevor Siemian and just the way that the Broncos ran the ball or tried to run the ball and the way they just carried out everything on offense, I was very, very upset. And it really made me appreciate how much we really respected and needed Peyton Manning last year, because Peyton Manning would check audibles. He'd have these checkdowns. He'd call out of a play at the line of scrimmage based on the adjustment by the defense. We didn't have that this year with Trevor Siemian. We didn't have a leader on the offensive side of the ball, which I think was very, very important for Denver to have this year, and it just simply wasn't there. C.J. Anderson got hurt after the San Diego game in Denver, and it was just, I think that was the moment that the Denver Broncos season kind of went downhill. You didn't have a prolific running back. You had Devontae Booker, who looked impressive multiple times this season, including Week 17. Devontae Booker looked phenomenal. But we had 4 or 5 games where Devontae Booker looked absolutely terrible and made Denver fans question why Elway even drafted him. He struggled in pass protection. He was inconsistent with hitting the hole. He couldn't hit a hole. He kept running into his blockers. It was just something that when we look at it, the Denver Broncos didn't have any continuity on offense. Obviously, you had Demaryius Thomas, you had Emmanuel Sanders, who both put up 1,000 yards this season, despite the fact that there was a lack of consistency on offense, a lack of production on offense. It was frustrating to see. Obviously, they didn't get 100 catches, but they did have 1,000 yards receiving this year. So that's a promising sign for there. However, you want to get those guys with 100 yards, 100 receptions per game, per season. 100 receptions per season and 100 yards per game. You want to have that with two guys. And I think of Demaryius Thomas, who faced a lot of criticism last year with drop passes. I think Demaryius Thomas came out this year and played a lot better. He seemed a lot more focused. And there were a couple games where Demaryius Thomas didn't appear to be himself. But I tell you what, I saw a lot from Demaryius Thomas, especially in the New Orleans Saints game. I think he really turned into a new person, a new wide receiver with a newfound confidence. I think he came out and he's like, I'm sick of the criticism. I'm tired of hearing with it. I'm a human being. And Demaryius Thomas is a human being. He's a phenomenal wide receiver. And there were times where quarterback play wasn't good enough to get him the ball. And that's where we see production fall in terms of not being efficient enough in terms of the offensive side of the ball. So when C.J. Anderson went down, Denver signed Justin Forsett. His first carry, he fumbled the ball, unfortunately. But it was pretty much a mix at the end of the year between Denver tailbacks, between Devontae Booker, Justin Forsett, and even Juwan Thompson got in the mix a little bit. Obviously, I think one thing that did hurt the Denver Broncos running game a little bit was losing fullback Andy Yanovich to a broken, I think it was a broken ankle or a broken hand. A lot of times, Andy Yanovich did hurt his hand midway through the season, but I think it was his ankle that he ended up having to have surgery on. And so Andy Yanovich was a prolific fullback, and I was super surprised. He was my surprise player of the year for the Denver Broncos. By far was Andy Yanovich, a guy who was just drafted, who came in and played an impact right away. We saw him in week 1 against the Carolina Panthers, who he attacked linebackers aggressively. He attacked guys like Luke Kuechly, Thomas Davis Sr. He attacked those guys ruthlessly and allowed the run game to open up for the Denver Broncos. And when he went down and when C.J. Anderson went down, the Denver Broncos offense sputtered. And it was hard to see. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons why the Denver Broncos did not do well this season. They didn't make the playoffs. They went 9-7. Obviously, that's a big drop off from what they were last year and the year before and the year before. Obviously, with Peyton Manning, I think Denver Broncos fans, we were blessed enough at one point to understand that we had a guy like Peyton Manning, a guy who's not of this world. When we look at NFL quarterbacks right now in the current state of the NFL, we look at guys who are top tier ahead of everybody. We look at Drew Brees, who's phenomenal, who can do a lot of things on his own. But when we talk about elite status, we look at guys like Tom Brady. Tom Brady alone, we saw as soon as he was done serving his 4-game suspension, he came back on a mission. He threw 28 touchdowns and only threw 2 interceptions this season. And that's quite impressive. So when we look at elite top tier quarterbacks, we look at guys like Peyton Manning, we look at guys like Tom Brady. I didn't see any other quarterback in the league this year that has that it factor. Maybe Aaron Rodgers. Maybe Aaron Rodgers does have that it factor. I see Matt Ryan's playing very well. I wouldn't necessarily call him elite yet, but Tom Brady was the elite factor. He was the biggest factor for that New England Patriots team as soon as he came back from suspension. They started rolling. They lost that really close game to Seattle in New England. But we've seen Seattle this year be very, very inconsistent, especially in their playoffs. He only putting up 5 points against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who they lost to on the road in Tampa Bay. I just look at that, all these different factors, and I'm trying to wonder what's the difference in the NFL right now between these elite teams and these teams that are obviously playoff contenders, but can they be championship contenders? And I look at Alex Smith. I look at the Kansas City Chiefs. I don't think Alex Smith is elite. I think Alex Smith has a nucleus around him of role players, of players who do their job, and obviously a good defense that helps the Kansas City Chiefs remain competitive. And then I look at teams like the Houston Texans. They don't have an elite quarterback. They have no prolific quarterback. They've got Brock Osweiler. They've got Tom Savage. They benched Brock Osweiler a few weeks ago, and Tom Savage is hurt. And so that's why Brock Osweiler is starting this week for the Houston Texans against the Oakland Raiders. And then we have the Derek Carrs. Obviously, Derek Carr's out for the rest of the playoffs, in my opinion. I don't think he's going to be back even if the Raiders make it to the Super Bowl. He goes down with a broken leg. You've got a backup by the name of Matt McGloin, who gets hurt against the Denver Broncos week 17. And now you're rolling into a playoff game with essentially one quarterback. You're going to have to sign a quarterback who's a free agent to come in to take up a roster spot in case Connor Cook gets hurt. We didn't see the Oakland Raiders play how the Oakland Raiders have played this year, and I think a lot of it was because Derek Carr was gone. They didn't have that leader. And if you watch the sound effects clip from Derek Carr this season, especially against the Indianapolis Colts, the game he broke his leg in, you see how much of a leader Derek Carr really is. And when I look across the NFL, I see guys like Tom Brady who are like that. I see guys like Drew Brees who are like that. I see guys like Aaron Rodgers who are like that. I see vocal leaders. When I look at some of these other teams, I don't see that leader. When I look at the Denver Broncos, I don't see that leader. who's encouraging in the huddle, who's doing things. I see a lot of quiet. I see a lot of slow body language from a lot of these quarterbacks, including Trevor Siemian. And I think that the Denver Broncos sorely lack a leader, which I think they need to address. A quarterback's got to step up. Either Trevor Siemian's got to step up and do that, or Paxton Lynch has got to step up and do that. The first rounder that they drafted with the 30th pick in the NFL draft in 2016. We're going to have a lot of different questions that we need to have answered. But when we look at the NFL as a whole and we look at the quarterback position, obviously a quarterback should be the leader on that team. And if you go across all 32 NFL teams right now and we look at leaders, these are the guys at quarterbacks who I can point out that are absolutely, you can tell they're leaders on the field. I think Andrew Luck, Tom Brady, obviously second to none, Drew Brees, you got guys like Matt Ryan, Aaron Rodgers, and Derek Carr. Those are the only quarterbacks right now at the top of my head that I can truly think of that are actually leaders on the field and can command a huddle. I think as an NFL quarterback, you need to be able to command a huddle. The quarterback position is the one position where you demand the most respect from your teammates, from your coaches, from your fans, and I think you have to take advantage of that. And I don't think Denver had that this year with Trevor Siemian, and I hope that Trevor Siemian can become a leader. I hope Paxton Lynch can become a leader, because you're going to need somebody to become a leader on that offense for the Denver Broncos if they want to experience any continuity. Now, a lot of things that play into this kind of situation here when I think about it is you look at the fact that Denver still has to hire a head coach. I think Denver will hire an offensive-minded head coach, bring back Wade Phillips, which I think you absolutely have to bring back Wade Phillips for what he's done for the defense. The players love him. His defensive schemes, his defensive adjustments are elite. Yeah, and it's gone to show. Obviously a top defense in the NFL the last 2 seasons. Obviously the number 1 pass defense 2 years in a row as well. And you got elite pass rushers in Von Miller. Obviously DeMarcus Ware was hurt this year. But you got a promising young guy by the name of Shane Ray as well. So when I look back at this whole NFL season and I look at the Denver Broncos and I look at the state of them, I feel like with all the struggles offensively, you have to bring in an offensive-minded head coach. And I think the perfect candidate for the Denver Broncos right now, I think, is Kyle Shanahan. And obviously a lot of people are like, oh, do you think he would go there? Obviously, especially with, the hostility between John Elway and Mike Shanahan and their fallout that they had. No, the fallout has improved a little bit. I think John Elway and Mike Shanahan have kind of mended their relationship a little bit. I think Kyle Shanahan would be a great fit for the Denver Broncos, and I'm going to tell you why. When we look at what Kyle Shanahan has done, Kyle Shanahan's been an offensive coordinator for a lot of years, and obviously in Atlanta, they're putting up tremendous numbers with Kyle Shanahan right now. But when we look at Matt Ryan a couple years ago, Matt Ryan was up and down. When Matt Ryan first came into the league his rookie year, we thought he could be the next coming of Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady. He had the potential. He had a lot of the intangibles when we looked at him on the field. We're like, okay, Matt Ryan is very impressive. He's got this repertoire. And then we experienced a year where Matt Ryan kept throwing picks and picks and picks and picks, and we're like, what's going on? Now, Matt Ryan is with Kyle Shanahan. And Kyle Shanahan has brought a new level of confidence to Matt Ryan, and we're seeing it. Matt Ryan is playing unbelievable football this year. I wouldn't say he's putting up MVP numbers, but he's putting up winning numbers, Pro Bowl football numbers at the quarterback position this year with a talented offense. And I mean, they have talented weapons with Julio Jones, Tyler Gabriel, Mohamed Sanu, Devontae Freeman, Tevin Coleman, 2 tailbacks who've caught passes and have had 100-yard receiving games out of the tailback position, out of the backfield on swing routes, one-on-ones with inside linebackers. We've seen Matt Ryan exploit that. And I think if anybody can take these Denver quarterbacks and Trevor Siemian and Paxton Lynch, I think, for example, Kyle Shanahan will be the perfect guy who can come into this franchise and organization and make this offense whole again, that can make this offense competitive once again, that they can develop some continuity running the ball, consistency throwing the ball, and I think the rest of it will take care of itself. When you have a consistent offense and a very good defense, the likelihood of you winning a majority of your games is very high. You'll definitely go above 500 in that aspect. And when we saw the difference between the Denver Broncos this year, when Denver played New England, Denver's defense held New England to 16 points. 16 total points, and they didn't allow Tom Brady to throw a single touchdown pass on them. Yet Denver could not score offensively. Denver moved the ball very well out of the no huddle in the first series, but Trevor Siemian threw a pick that got returned pretty much 50 yards back. And that pretty much ended the whole momentum of the game for the Denver Broncos, and the defense played a phenomenal game that game. And so we've seen the Denver defense play well in a majority of the games. I think the one game that the Denver defense really struggled with, I think, was the Kansas City Chiefs game on Christmas Day. That whole team, from the offense, defense to the special team side of the ball, Denver did not come out ready to compete at all, and it smacked them in the mouth. And it was very upsetting. It was very hard for the Denver Broncos to regain anything, and the Kansas City Chiefs rolled all over them, and then the season was over. So I think Kyle Shanahan's a great candidate. Obviously, some other candidates could be Vance Joseph. He's a little more defensive minded. I don't think Denver's gonna hire him as a head coach with a defensive mindset, when obviously the primitive focus of this team needs to be on the offensive side of the ball. If you keep a guy like Wade Phillips, you don't have to worry about the defense at all. The defense will be fine. You're returning a lot of players. You get Vance Walker back. I think you're going to let Sylvester Williams go, and I think you're going to try to pick up in free agency very good nose tackle, defensive tackle that can step in and help on stopping the run. And obviously, we saw that Denver kind of did miss Malik Jackson this year in regards to that aspect in and of itself. Obviously, I think you need to make some upgrades at the inside linebacker position. Brandon Marshall was hurt. We saw that Brandon Marshall really wasn't himself this year, and it was really odd. He wasn't able to cover linebackers or receivers as well as he did in years prior, and I'm not sure why, and that really kind of baffles me. I don't think it's scheme. I think it's more of an age factor, obviously a health factor as well. He's been injured with a hamstring majority of the season. But you got some young, impressive guys by the name of Corey Nelson who stepped in Marshall's absence and played really well. You got Zaire Anderson. You got guys like Dakota Watson who can rush off the edge. Obviously, DeMarcus Ware had back surgery and was only on a 1-year, $1 million contract with the Denver Broncos. We can look at a lot of different things here. I don't know if DeMarcus Ware will be back. I know Von Miller says that DeMarcus told him he's got a lot left in the tank. Will Denver pick him up? I think if DeMarcus Ware can come back and play, I think Denver will pick him up for another 1-year, $1 million option, which as DeMarcus Ware's already said, it's not about the money. It's about, he wants to be in a winning culture, and his leadership alone for this defense has helped guys like Shane Ray, Bradley Roby, Von Miller, guys who were once had some troubled offseason issues, guys who don't get in trouble, guys who now have embraced a leadership role and who do the right thing on and off the field. We've seen the presence of having guys like Peyton Manning and DeMarcus Ware on your team. I think DeMarcus Ware, if he can come back and play, I think he will be back for the Denver Broncos for this defense. Obviously, I think he'll be in a limited role situation, probably on pivotal downs. But I think we're going to see a lot more of Shane Ray and Shaquille Barrett, guys who stepped up this year when DeMarcus Ware was out. I think that's going to help a lot. And obviously, you got some young guys in Kyle Pecco, who just got his first tackle this past week against the Oakland Raiders. A guy who's been on the practice squad and on several NFL team practice squads as well, is back with the Denver Broncos right now. There's a lot of question marks, but I think you're going to let some guys go. Obviously, I think you need to let some guys go. You got to pick up Brandon McManus. I think McManus and Kayvon Webster are guys you need to pick up. Kayvon Webster really thrived this year on special teams and also filled in at the cornerback position, especially when some cornerbacks were hurt. We saw Aqib Talib had a back injury early on in the year. Kayvon Webster did a phenomenal job. Bradley Roby played very well this year. The no-fly zone was the number 1 ranked pass defense once again in the NFL for the second consecutive year. You got rookies in the name of Will Parks and Justin Simmons who came in, and they looked pretty impressive this year. They played pretty well for rookies on a very talented defense. We saw Justin Simmons and Will Parks both contribute to win a game against the New Orleans Saints with a blocked PAT that ended up being scored back for Denver. That won Denver the game in such a crazy fashion. But we're going to get to that at one point. We're going to have an episode where we highlight the top moments of the Denver Broncos season here in the next couple of weeks. We're going to put that together for you. But we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we get back, we're going to break down the NFL playoff picture between the AFC and the NFC, and we're going to analyze the matchups, and I'm going to give you my predictions as well. And I encourage you to tweet me or tell me your predictions at Cody Rourke NFL, or you can tune in to CodyRourke18.com and leave feedback there as well on who you think is going to win the playoff matchups. I'll post a blog. We'll have it all going here in just a few moments. But tweet me your thoughts at Cody Rourke NFL, your playoff predictions. We will read them on air next week after the playoffs have already happened. We'll see if your predictions are right or wrong. We will see.
This is iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio.
iHeartRadio makes you want to move.
When you have a great melody,
a song can last forever.
Instantly connected.
I love it when the beat goes boom.
iHeartRadio is the way I get to you.
The biggest songs, the biggest artists,
All in one place.
iHeartRadio.
I'll see you there.
The four of us, we never missed a game. Then life, jobs, kids, new cities. It was time we got back together. A few minutes on NFL Ticket Exchange, and we were set. 4 100% authentic, real deal tickets to the Niners. From one fan to another. There's nothing better than this.
No place like home. Get your tickets today at NFL.com.
Welcome back to the Coach's Corner podcast. And as we mentioned before the commercial break, the playoff picture for the NFL has been set in stone, and some matchups that are intriguing are about to happen. Some matchups that aren't really too exciting at all are about to take place as well. And so we're going to analyze the NFL playoff picture currently in the NFC and the AFC. Starting off with the NFC playoff picture, we look at the Dallas Cowboys and the Atlanta Falcons sitting at the number 1 and 2 seed with first round byes as the Detroit Lions travel to Seattle to take on the Seahawks in the wild card round, and the New York Giants travel to Lambeau Field to take on the Green Bay Packers. These two matchups, in my opinion, are very exciting. I think they're the most exciting matchups in the playoffs right now in the wild card weekend is on the NFC side of the ball. And the reason I say that is because you got the Detroit Lions who've been playing phenomenal offensively. Obviously, Matt Stafford's been struggling a little bit since injuring his middle finger on his throwing hand. But Matt Stafford before that has been putting up tremendous numbers for the Detroit Lions. And they've been the team that I think has been the most productive, but, not really talked about team in the NFL this year. The Detroit Lions, I think, are the most underrated team right now in the playoffs. Nobody's talking about them, and I think they like it that way. I think they're going to compete. Obviously, they competed really well against the Packers in Week 17. Obviously, lost 31-24 to Green Bay in the regular season finale. But I do think that the Detroit Lions have a very great chance to compete against the Seattle Seahawks this week. Seattle's been one of the most up and down teams in my head that are currently in the playoffs right now. And the reason I say that is because they've had a really weird year. They've got a 10-5-1 record, obviously a tie. They've had 5 losses, but in the games that they've lost in a manner that doesn't make sense. They lost to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers 10-5 in score, which resembled a baseball game to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. It wasn't really we didn't see a lot of production out of the offense, out of Russell Wilson and the running game. I think that obviously I think the biggest loss for the Seattle Seahawks this year was losing Earl Thomas to a broken leg. They just looked out of sorts ever since Earl Thomas has broken his leg on defense. They've looked like they've struggled quite a bit. So I think this matchup with the Detroit Lions traveling to Seattle to take on the Seahawks will be a very interesting one. I think it will be competitive, and I do predict that this game's going to go down to the wire. I think Seattle wins with a late field goal. I think they win 23-20 over Detroit late in this game to advance to the next round to play either the Cowboys or the Falcons, depending on who wins the game between the Giants and the Packers, which we analyze that game next. The Giants have been on a roll this year. They've lost a couple of games, but they've also beaten the Dallas Cowboys twice this season. So the New York Giants have, I think, a recipe to get deep in the playoffs. I think they can go in, and eventually I think they could even represent the NFC in the Super Bowl. I think that's the kind of team they have. They've got a defense that has been playing pretty dang well. Eli Manning in the offense, obviously Odell Beckham Jr. ever since the goalpost and the kicking net incident has been playing phenomenal. They seem like they've got their things together a little bit. I think the New York Giants might be the deadliest team in the playoffs right now, in my opinion. But it's going to be tough when you play a team, but who's got the quarterback by the name of Aaron Rodgers obviously in Lambeau Field, and he's got his weapon Jordy Nelson back, obviously Devontae Adams as well. I think that the Green Bay Packers also are a very deadly team, and I said it earlier in the year. I think my prediction for the teams that may represent the NFC in the Super Bowl based on the current playoff picture would either be the Falcons, the Giants, or the Packers. I think either of these three teams will represent the NFC in the Super Bowl this year. I think that the New York Giants will go into Lambeau. I think kind of reminiscent of the year they made it to the Super Bowl to beat Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. I think the New York Giants are going to win late in the game. I think they're going to win 21-17 over the Green Bay Packers in this game, this upcoming weekend on Wildcard Weekend. I think the New York Giants will advance. And so it's either going to be the New York Giants and the Seattle Seahawks taking on the Cowboys and the Falcons. That's my opinion for the NFC side of the ball. Now moving on to the AFC side of the ball, we look at a more obsolete kind of limited playoff picture. And what I mean by that is I don't think the AFC side of the ball is really as exciting in terms of its matchups and Wildcard Weekend. And when I say that, I say we see the New England Patriots and the Kansas City Chiefs have the first round bye. They'll play in a week and a half from now. I think when we look at the Miami Dolphins and the Pittsburgh Steelers, that might be the one matchup in the playoff series continually right now that maybe has a little more interest. Ryan Tannehill may play. He may not play. His status is currently questionable. Matt Moore hasn't looked bad in Tannehill's absence. Matt Moore has actually played pretty well. And they have to travel to, Pittsburgh this time, cold time of the year. Miami won the matchup earlier this year, with a 200-yard rushing effort by Jay Ajayi. But that was in Miami, and it was warm. So now Miami has to get away from a little bit of the warm, and they have to go to the cold terrain in Pittsburgh to face a healthy Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown and a pretty solid defense that has been playing pretty well lately in Pittsburgh. I think Pittsburgh wins this game 27-13 over the Miami Dolphins. I just don't think that Miami's got it in them. We saw what the New England Patriots did to Miami's defense this past week, and I don't think Miami's got a guy on that team that can cover Antonio Brown. And if they try to triple coverage or double coverage Antonio Brown, some of these younger playmakers that Ben Roethlisberger has as his weapons, I think they're going to make some catches. They're going to make some plays if they try to double coverage or triple coverage Antonio Brown. I just think that the Pittsburgh Steelers have too much firepower on offense right now, and I think it'll overwhelm the Miami Dolphins, and I think Pittsburgh advances next week. And then we look at the Oakland Raiders taking on the Houston Texans. We've got Connor Cook starting for the Raiders taking on Brock Osweiler, who's starting for the Texans. Both these quarterbacks are starting due to injuries to their current quarterbacks. We saw Derek Carr get injured week 16 against the Indianapolis Colts, break his leg. He's out for the year. We saw Matt McGloin in week 17 get hurt going up against the Denver Broncos defense. He is out for the game, and Connor Cook will start for the Oakland Raiders. And then we saw Tom Savage in week 17 suffer a concussion. He's currently in concussion protocol and is currently out of the game. So Brock Osweiler will start for the Houston Texans. And this game is probably the least exciting playoff game that is currently in the NFL playoffs right now. There's not a lot of excitement to it. The Houston Texans defense underratedly has been playing pretty well on defense. We saw how the Oakland Raiders looked on offense without Derek Carr. And, I think Derek Carr is obviously the difference maker for this Oakland Raiders team. He brings a different level of leadership. As I talked about early in the show, Derek Carr has an ability to lead and command an offense in a way that I've seen very few guys in the NFL that are currently as NFL quarterbacks right now that can do outside of the names of Tom Brady and Drew Brees. Derek Carr does a very great job at commanding an offense, and they play so much better with him. And we saw how the Oakland Raiders offense played without him last week. So it could be an early indicator of how the Oakland Raiders first playoff appearance in many years may go. But then again, we've got Brock Osweiler, who is an interception machine for the Houston Texans. You got guys by the name of Will Fuller, who I think is an explosive playmaker, and obviously DeAndre Hopkins as well. But those guys have not been able to be as productive as DeAndre Hopkins was last year. Will Fuller, a rookie this year, has had he's had an okay year for a rookie. But like I said, quarterback play has been the bugaboo for the Houston Texans this year. The defense has been playing well. Obviously, Jadeveon Clowney's been healthy. He's been playing really well for them as well. Quentin Demp's safety for them has been playing absolutely phenomenal at the safety position for the Houston Texans. He's had an interception in his last 5 or 6 games, and that's a lot of, that's like 6 picks in 4 games I think that he had one game with 2 interceptions. Quentin Dempsey playing really well. The defense playing really well. And we saw the Oakland Raiders defense play really staggered last week, and they did not look anywhere near competitive as they have in past. And the Denver Broncos obsolete offense that was there actually played really well against this Oakland Raiders defense. And Denver won 24-6. So I'm going to predict that this game is a low-scoring game, but I do think that the Houston Texans will edge out the Oakland Raiders 16-10, and the Houston Texans will advance to the next week. And so I think that the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Houston Texans will go on to face either New England and the Kansas City Chiefs. And those secondary matchups will be tough as well. I think that the New England Patriots are going to represent the AFC in the Super Bowl. And if I have to give any prediction, I'm predicting in Super Bowl 51, we'll see the New England Patriots against the Atlanta Falcons for Super Bowl 51 in Houston. I think that might be a prolific matchup right there. My only question is the suspect defense that the Atlanta Falcons defense has right now. Their defense has been really inconsistent, hasn't played too well often at times. So I think that the Atlanta Falcons may represent the NFC in the playoffs. But if I had to choose a team outside of the Falcons, I think will go on and will challenge Tom Brady in the Super Bowl, my secondary pick would be the New England Patriots against the New York Giants. Brady versus Manning once again in the Super Bowl, where Eli Manning has Tom Brady's number. That's my current prediction right there, is either the Falcons and Patriots or the Giants and the Patriots in the Super Bowl. And so I want to hear what your guys' predictions are. So when we get on the show next week, I'm going to read off all fan predictions. We're going to see if you're right. And I'm going to send the winner of the closest guess to the scores of the game. So in order to qualify, I'm going to send a prize to the winner who tweets me at Cody Rourke NFL the current playoff matchups between the Detroit Lions, Seattle Seahawks, New York Giants, and the Green Bay Packers, and the Dolphins and Steelers, Raiders and the Texans with their score predictions. The one who had the closest score prediction for all the games will win a prize. I'll send you a prize courtesy of the Coach's Corner podcast. Send me your tweets, your predictions at Cody Rourke NFL. And next week on next week's show, we will analyze thoroughly the games that have been played in the wildcard matchup, analyze the divisional round, and look forward to seeing who is going to advance to the conference championship games in 3 weeks. It's a very exciting time for football. It's a very exciting time for sports. The NFL season is almost over, sadly, but the show must go on. So, thank you for joining me here today on the Coach's Corner podcast. This is your host, Cody Rourke speaking. We will see you next week for another episode of the Coach's Corner podcast on iHeartRadio and CodyRourke18.com. Don't forget to tweet me your score predictions at Cody Rourke NFL on Twitter.
You've been listening to the Coach's Corner podcast on iHeartRadio and iTunes. For future episodes and archives of previous episodes of the show, go to CodyRourke18.com.